A lonely, piercing steam whistle screams through the dense, gray fog of a fractured post-Civil War America, signaling the ruthless dawn of a new industrial age. The nation lies bleeding from years of internal conflict, creating a massive vacuum of power that is waiting for an uncrowned king to violently seize it. In this chaotic landscape, the borders of commerce are being redrawn not by politicians in Washington, but by the titans of industry forging empires of steel. We begin with the old lion, Cornelius Vanderbilt, a man who does not merely play the game of business, but seeks to own the board entirely. Vanderbilt stands in his high office, looking down at the rail yards with the heavy, battle-scarred gaze of a general who has never known the taste of defeat. He understands a fundamental truth of the era. Whoever controls the logistics of the nation controls the very blood flow of the American economy. The railways are the internet of the 19th century, the singular network connecting a fragmented world, and Vanderbilt intends to be the only server online. To consolidate his power, he executes a move of stunning brutality, blockading the Albany Bridge to choke off all competitor access to New York City. This is the physical equivalent of deplatforming. He shuts the gateway, leaving millions of dollars of cargo rotting in the sun, while his rivals panic. Observe the strategy. He leverages a critical choke point to force capitulation, a tactic we see mirrored today when big tech throttles traffic to crush competition. Vanderbilt mutters to himself in the silence of his office, realizing that power is not about being loved, but about being the absolute, unavoidable necessity. The blockade works perfectly, breaking the stock prices of his enemies and allowing him to buy their railroads for pennies on the dollar, consolidating the New York Central. He sits upon a throne of iron rails, believing he has conquered the physical world, but he fails to see the intangible shift on the horizon. While Vanderbilt fights for the tracks, a new resource is bubbling up from the ground in Pennsylvania, promising to light the world and fuel a new war. Enter John D. Rockefeller, a man who is the antithesis of Vanderbilt's brash force. He is the cold specter, disciplined, stoic, and terrifyingly quiet. Rockefeller is not driven by the desire for fame or the roar of the crowd, but by a chilling, messianic conviction that he is God's instrument. He does not view business as a gamble, but as a divine ordering of chaos, believing that efficiency is a form of prayer and waste is a sin. But before he can ascend, fate intervenes in a moment that will define his psychology and the trajectory of the entire global economy for a century. A young Rockefeller rushes to the station to catch a train for a crucial meeting, his mind racing with numbers, only to miss the departure by mere seconds. He watches in frustration as the iron beast chugs away without him, unaware that the hand of Providence has just reached down to spare his life. Miles down the track, that very train derails, plunging into a ravine in a twisted, horrific mass of metal and steam, killing nearly everyone on board. Rockefeller stands at the telegraph office, receiving the news of the massacre, and a cold realization washes over him. He was saved for a specific purpose. This near-death experience solidifies his chosen complex. He now operates with the absolute fearlessness of a man who believes he cannot die until his work is done. He turns his attention to oil, a volatile and unpredictable industry, seeing not a casino for gamblers, but a system waiting to be ruthlessly disciplined. Kerosene is the product, the light of the future, but the industry is a mess of wildcatters and explosions, crying out for a central organizing intelligence. Rockefeller realizes that drilling for oil is a fool's game of risk, but refining the oil, controlling the process, is where the true enduring power lies. He begins to build Standard Oil, not just as a company, but as a machine designed to devour competition through superior efficiency and ruthless cost-cutting measures. Meanwhile, Vanderbilt, sensing the plateau of the railroad boom, looks for a new commodity to fill his trains and keep his massive network profitable. The old lion summons the young upstart Rockefeller to New York, viewing him merely as a pawn to be manipulated to fill his empty boxcars. It is a meeting of two eras, the master of the physical infrastructure versus the architect of the energy resource that will eventually power the world. Rockefeller prepares for the meeting with obsessive detail, knowing that he is walking into the lion's den with nothing but his wits and his cookbooks. He wears his best suit, masking the fact that his company is on the brink of insolvency, projecting an image of absolute stability and immense potential success. As he enters Vanderbilt's opulent headquarters, the contrast is striking. The rough, cigar-chomping Commodore versus the pious, ascetic, and eerily calm Rockefeller. Vanderbilt offers an exclusive deal to ship Rockefeller's oil at a steep discount, thinking he has secured a steady stream of cargo for his trains. Rockefeller accepts, but he knows something Vanderbilt does not. The volume of oil he promised is greater than his current capacity to produce it. This is the entrepreneur's ultimate gamble, selling a reality that does not yet exist and then sprinting to build the bridge before you fall into the abyss. Rockefeller returns to Cleveland with a contract that could bankrupt him if he fails, or make him the king of oil if he can scale immediately. He begins to acquire his competitors, showing them his books and offering them a choice. Join Standard Oil and survive, or compete and be crushed. His strategy is the roll-up, absorbing the fragmented market into a singular monopoly, much like modern tech giants acquiring potential rivals before they become threats. Standard Oil grows at a terrifying pace, standardizing the quality of kerosene and making it safe for the average American home, thereby creating massive demand. As Rockefeller's power grows, he begins to chafe under the control of the railroads, realizing that his margins are being eaten by Vanderbilt's transportation monopolies. Vanderbilt, seeing Rockefeller's rise, attempts to squeeze him for higher rates, forming a cartel with other railroad tycoons to dictate terms to the oil man. The old lion believes he holds all the cards, assuming that oil cannot move without his tracks. A fatal underestimation of Rockefeller's ingenuity. Rockefeller sits alone in the dark, the weight of the empire pressing down, asking himself, in this game of giants, am I the driver or the fuel? He refuses to be the fuel. He decides to change the fundamental mechanics of how resources are moved, bypassing the railroads entirely. The solution is the pipeline, a radical innovation that threatens to render the entire railroad industry obsolete for the transport of liquid cargo. This is the disruption moment, comparable to Netflix, bypassing cable infrastructure to deliver content directly to the consumer via the internet. Rockefeller invests in a massive pipeline network, a high-risk engineering feat that requires thousands of laborers working in secret to avoid railroad sabotage. The construction is a war zone. Railroad gangs attack the pipeline workers, understanding that this metal tube represents the death of their monopoly pricing power. Vanderbilt watches from New York, initially dismissing the pipeline as a pipe dream, failing to see that the ground is shifting beneath his feet. When the valves turn and the oil begins to flow from Pennsylvania to the refineries without a single train car, the silence is deafening. The railroads lose their most lucrative cargo overnight, and the balance of power in American industry shifts violently from steel tracks to steel pipes. Vanderbilt is furious, but he is fighting gravity. Innovation that reduces friction and cost will always defeat the gatekeeper who relies on toll booths. Rockefeller has not just won a battle, he has rewritten the rules of the game, proving that infrastructure is only valuable as long as it is essential. With the railroads weakened, the panic of 1,873 hits, triggering a massive economic depression that wipes out weaker companies and consolidates Rockefeller's grip. The crash serves Rockefeller well. While others panic, he buys, adhering to the principle that the best time to expand is when blood is in the streets. He stands as the titan of titans, his wealth exploding beyond comprehension. Yet he remains the same cold, distant figure, eating crackers and milk for lunch. The loneliness of his position deepens. He is the most hated man in America, vilified in the press as a monster strangling the free market. Yet in his internal monologue, he justifies it all. I have brought order. I have lowered prices. I have lit the night for the common man. Vanderbilt, now aging and approaching the end of his reign, realizes that the world has moved past the era of the brute force tycoon. The old lion lies on his deathbed, a testament to the era of physical conquest, while the cold specter rises to manage the era of corporate complexity. Rockefeller's dominance draws the attention of the ultimate power, the United States government, setting the stage for the first great antitrust battle. But before the lawyers arrive, we must understand the scale of what Rockefeller achieved. He turned a chaotic, dangerous fluid into gold. He standardized the barrel, the refining process, and the distribution, creating the model for the modern multinational corporation that exists today. The conflict between Vanderbilt and Rockefeller was never just about money. It was a clash of philosophies, the visible force versus the invisible hand. Vanderbilt wanted to build monuments to his name. Rockefeller wanted to build a machine that would run forever, with or without him. As we transition to the next phase, we must ask, would you have the courage to kill your darling business to save the future of your empire? Rockefeller did exactly that by cannibalizing his own localized refineries to build centralized, efficient behemoths that could serve the global market. The narrative arc bends toward the inevitable, the replacement of the pioneer with the manager, the replacement of the sword with the spreadsheet. But the story is not over. A new rival is emerging, one who deals not in oil or rail, but in steel. Andrew Carnegie is entering the arena. However, we remain focused on the psychological toll of this ascent. Rockefeller becomes a prisoner of his own success, guarded by detectives, isolated by wealth. He teaches his children strict frugality, terrified that the wealth he accumulated will destroy their character, a paradox of the self-made man. The camera pans over the Rust Belt, the smoke stacks rising like cathedrals of a new religion, with Rockefeller as the high priest of capitalism. We see the legacy of the pipeline. It is the precursor to the fiber optic cable, the hidden vein that carries the lifeblood of the economy. Vanderbilt's trains still run, but they are now servants to the commodities they carry, demoted from masters of the universe to mere couriers. The lesson is clear. Owning the road is powerful, but owning what moves on the road and having the ability to build a new road is ultimate power. As the fog lifts on the 20th century, the landscape is forever changed. The agrarian republic has died, and the industrial empire has been born. Rockefeller looks at a map of the world, seeing not nations, but markets, foreshadowing the globalization that will define the modern era. He whispers to the empty room, competition is a sin, encapsulating the monopolist's creed that drives the consolidation of every major industry. The ghost of Vanderbilt lingers in the Grand Central Terminal, a monument to the past, while Rockefeller's legacy flows in the veins of every machine. We pause here to reflect on the nature of ambition. Is it a fire that warms the house, or an inferno that burns it down? For these men, there was no distinction. To build was to burn the old, to create was to destroy the inefficient, regardless of the human cost. The script of history is written by the victors, but the subtext is written by the disrupted, the workers, and the competitors left in the dust. Rockefeller's efficiency came at the price of ruthlessness, a trade-off that society still debates when looking at the monopolies of today. As we move toward the climax of their lives, we see the shift from accumulation to preservation, the desperate need to secure a legacy that outlasts the man. Vanderbilt leaves a dynasty that ultimately squanders his fortune. Rockefeller leaves a foundation that systematically gives it away to reshape society. This divergence in legacy reveals their final difference. Vanderbilt lived for his family name, while Rockefeller lived for the abstract concept of impact. The train whistle blows again, but this time it sounds distant, a fading echo of an era that is being replaced by the hum of the refinery. The visuals shift from the gritty iron and wood of the rail yard to the sleek, chemical complexity of the processing plant. We are left with the image of Rockefeller, the cold specter, standing atop the world, yet looking for the next threat, the next disruption. He knows that just as he dethroned the railroads, something will eventually come to dethrone oil, though he cannot yet see what it is. The cycle of disruption is the heartbeat of capitalism. No king rules forever, and every empire carries the seeds of its own destruction. We close this chapter on the realization that Vanderbilt and Rockefeller were not just men, but forces of nature that collided to shape a continent. Their rivalry taught us that the establishment is always vulnerable to the innovator who refuses to accept the current constraints of reality. The stage is set for the next titan to emerge from the smoke, ready to build the vertical skylines that will scrape the heavens. We pivot now to the structural anatomy of this war. It is the first true instance of platform disruption in American history. Vanderbilt's railroads were the hardware, the physical network that every business had to plug into to survive. By building the pipeline, Rockefeller didn't just build a better train, he built the cloud, rendering the physical server farms of the railroad obsolete. This is the nightmare of every modern CEO. Waking up to find that a startup has not just beaten your product, but deleted the need for your industry. The pipeline is completed. 4,000 miles of iron veins pumping kerosene silently beneath the earth. Invisible and unstoppable. Vanderbilt sees his cargo volume plummet. The trains run empty, ghost ships drifting across a sea of steel, bleeding money with every mile. The old lion roars, slashing prices to the bone in a desperate attempt to starve Rockefeller, but he fails to understand the math of the new world. Rockefeller has achieved scale efficiency. Because he owns the pipeline, his transport costs are zero, while Vanderbilt still has to pay for coal and crew. It is a mathematical checkmate. You cannot win a price war against a man whose marginal cost of delivery is effectively free. Vanderbilt is forced to admit defeat, a taste so bitter it poisons his final years, leaving him to contemplate the limits of brute force. The scene shifts to the Panic of 1873, the first Great Depression, triggered largely by the collapse of the railroad bubble. Rockefeller helped pop. While the stock market bleeds and banks shutter their doors, Rockefeller walks through the carnage with a checkbook, buying out his broken rivals. The time to buy is when the blood is running in the streets, a maxim that defines the predatory grace of the true monopolist. He consolidates the industry into the trust, a legal innovation that allows him to control companies across state lines. The forerunner to the modern conglomerate, Standard Oil now controls 90% of the oil in North America. Rockefeller is no longer a businessman. He is a sovereign state in a three-piece suit. We see him in his office, now older, the silence around him absolute. He has reached the summit, but the air is thin and cold. The internal monologue returns. I have brought order to chaos, yet they call me a monster. Is the shepherd a monster for fencing in the sheep? He is the cold specter, fully realized, a man who has excised human emotion from the ledger of business to achieve perfect efficiency. But as Vanderbilt fades, a new realization dawns. The era of the individual titan is ending, replaced by the era of the institution. Vanderbilt dies in 1877, leaving behind a massive fortune, but a fractured family that will consume itself in feuds and excess. Rockefeller watches from a distance, learning the final lesson. To build a legacy, you must institutionalize your values, not just your wealth. He turns his terrifying discipline toward philanthropy, applying the same ruthless efficiency to giving money away as he did to making it. He creates the modern foundation, funding medicine and education, effectively buying his redemption and rewriting his history while still alive. Now, let us bridge the gap to today. Look at the titans of Silicon Valley: Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg. They are the spiritual successors of this war. Bezos, building his own delivery network, Amazon Logistics, to bypass FedEx, is pure Rockefeller. Musk, building Starlink to bypass traditional telecom infrastructure, is the pipeline strategy applied to the vacuum of space. The gateway metaphor remains. Whoever owns the interface, the screen, the search bar, the app store, taxes the entire economy. Vanderbilt blocked the bridge. Today, Apple blocks the App Store, and Google controls the search results. The game hasn't changed, only the tokens. As we reach the resolution, we see the inevitable fragmentation of Standard Oil by the Supreme Court in 1911, the government finally stepping in. But Rockefeller wins even in defeat. The breakup splits his one giant company into 34 smaller ones, tripling his personal net worth. He sits in his garden, a withered old man playing golf, laughing quietly as the telegrams arrive, telling him he is now the richest man in history. The moral of the story is not about oil or trains. It is about the nature of vision and the courage to execute it against the current of the times. Vanderbilt was the king of the tangible, the master of what could be seen and touched. He represents the peak of the Industrial Revolution's first wave. Rockefeller was the architect of the intangible, the master of systems, logistics, and strategy. He represents the birth of the modern corporate algorithmic world. The final visual, a split screen. On the left, a rusting steam engine overgrown with weeds. On the right, a pristine, complex refinery lit up at night like a city. The voiceover asks, in the end, what separates the forgotten millionaire from the immortal titan? It is the ability to see the invisible geometry of the market, to understand that the map is not the territory. Vanderbilt fought the war he could see. Rockefeller fought the war that was coming. The script closes with the camera zooming out from the refinery to the globe, showing the spider web of lights connecting the continents. Energy, information, capital, it all flows through the channels dug by these men, for better or for worse. We are living in the house that Rockefeller built, heated by his oil, organized by his corporate structure, and disrupted by his philosophy. The final shot returns to the face of the young Rockefeller, missing that train years ago, staring down the track at the empty space where death waited. He turns away from the tracks and walks into the fog, not with fear, but with the certainty of a man who knows the script is already written. Success is not a destination, but the ability to see the roads that everyone else insists do not exist.